Hey, y'all, today we're going to go over World War One. All right, let's do it. So, one thing to look at when we're looking at all this foreign policy stuff is our definition. So, isolationism is the kind of, if we were to have like one extreme from like non intervention, meaning not being involved in the world, into like extreme interventionism, which is extreme, getting involved in the world, I guess. Right? Isolationism would be at one end of the spectrum. That means you're kind of like not engaging with the world in any sort of way. You are declining treaties, alliances, even trade agreements, right? And then as we like kind of move up, you can have neutrality, right? And neutrality means you're not taking sides in a war. And I think this is a really important word because neutrality doesn't mean we're not engaging in anything. And I think the one way that we are consistently being engaged with the world during this time, especially during this time, is economics, right? Because of economics, because we have all of these major corporations, we are really getting involved in the world with economics. We're looking for new markets. We have global corporations, right? We want to have, merchants and things like that working all over the world. So even though we are trying to not engage in wars, we are consistently trying to trade. So although I think we're trying to remain neutral, we are kind of avoiding like isolationism, but it's kind of a minor thing. And as we move into more interventionist thing, there are treaties. You could do aid, you could do cooperation, war, and imperialism. So one way we have seen that the United States is getting involved in the world even before World War One is imperialism. Right before World War One, we are going to have the Philippines insurrection, the Spanish-American War, that is kind of giving us our colonies, right? So this is something that we are involved in. We are also kind of working with, and what we see in giving aid and military aid to Central and South America, and we are getting involved in more of these diplomacies. So while we are trying to remain neutral, right, going all the way back to George Washington, we always say that we do not want to get involved in European affairs. This is a long-standing part of American foreign policy. We are increasingly during the Gilded Age getting involved with the rest of the world. So it's something to consider. So as we look at the causes of the war on a world scale, this is not, what do you call it, world history, so we don't have to concentrate on it too much, but it's what a lot of people call mania. Mania. And we'll take a look at this in. The M stands for militarism, right? And what is happening with militarization in the world is it is, arming. We have countries that are building up their military. We have alliances, secret alliances that are dragging the country into conflict. We have imperialism, right? Countries are competing for overseas colonies. We have nationalism, what we call jingoism as well, which is extreme strength of each country. We have the assassination for Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and this is what sets off a chain of events. So what I kind of like to do when we take a look at these causes is, what is the United States doing? We are militarizing like other countries are, right? We are increasing our navy. We talked about Teddy Roosevelt's big stick. We are engaging in imperialism. We have done that, right? We've gained Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. We are engaged in nationalism, right? Where we were talking about yellow journalism and all these other things, or what is also known as jingoism, which is just extreme nationalism. So the United States is doing these things, but what are we still trying to avoid? We still avoid alliances. And I guess the other question is, do we care about the assassination of Franz Ferdinand? Not a whole lot. And so while the rest of the world is engaged in these alliances, and while the rest of the world is lining up with the two sides after this assassination, the United States is like, hey, let's try to remain neutral, right? And so it is neutral and inevitable that some will wish one nation and another. Such divisions would be fatal to our peace of mind. We must be impartial in thought as well as action. This is Wilson's original idea for World War I. We must be neutral. And so what he wants to do is not get engaged with the war, remain neutral. And he tries to pursue this policy. The two sides are going to be France, Great Britain, Russia, and then later the U.S. against and Italy, which go in Japan, Germany, Austria, Hungary, Ottoman Empire, right? So, but what do we have to look at when we talk about being neutral is our trade policies, right? So we believe that we could trade at the same time we are going to remain neutral. But if you take a look at who are we trading with the most, if we take a look at 1916, we are trading a lot with Great Britain, right? How much are we trading with Germany? Like, not at all, right? Barely any. And this is growing disparity by 1916. There's a huge disparity, right? But even here, there are disparities going on. So why do we think, we think that we should be able to trade with whomever we want while we are going to war. But it is hard to do that because who we're going to trade with most is going to be Great Britain, right? And why are we going to trade with Great Britain the most? Well, one is because we have had a natural alliance with them. But the other thing is that there is going to be Great Britain has a big navy, and Great Britain is going to have an embargo against Germany. So Great Britain essentially is going to set up shop around here, right? And if any U.S. ships try to come in, they would have to break through Great Britain to get to Germany. This blockade is very effective against Germany. And so the United States is just going to sort of naturally trade with Great Britain more and naturally trade with France. It's just sort of a geography thing. And we are kind of unwilling or unable to break that British blockade. So Germany is suffering under this blockade from British ships. They know that the U.S. is trading more with Great Britain. They do not want the United States to get involved, but they have to do something. So this is the blockade. And, we are seeking to remain neutral. He kept us out of war. But then what Germany is going to do is they're going to start to sink ships. They cannot go kind of head-to-head with the British ships. So what they decide to do is go to unrestricted submarine warfare. And the most famous example of this is the Lusitania in 1915, when the U.S. is a passenger ship is sunk by Germans, killing 1,200 individuals, including 100 Americans. Now, Germany claimed the ship had munitions, and but afterwards, what they decide is that they're going to provide warnings to any ships that are not like military ships in this unrestricted submarine warfare. And I think to the German side as well, is they did not maybe particularly warn folks, as they were sinking them. But if you take a look at this notice, it's the Imperial German Embassy right next to an ad for the Lusitania. And essentially what they're saying is, if you get on this ship, we might shoot you down. And this is from the Imperial German Embassy. So a lot of people say like the Germans were, engaging in this unrestricted warfare. But they did give warning in advertisements ahead of time. So these U-boats are one of the main reasons why we are going to go to war. They are infringing on our right to trade. They claim they are going to stop it, but they have to restart it because they are suffering under these blockades. So this unrestricted submarine warfare is the biggest cause for U.S. entry. But the second one is going to be what's called the Zimmermann telegram. The Germans sent a telegram to Mexico, and they essentially told Mexico that if the United States declares war on Germany, and then Mexico joined the side of Germany, and then Mexico attacked on the southern border, they would return all the land that we had just received in the Spanish-American War. And this is his thing. So then we're going to get to Wilson's speech, which is one of the things you guys have to analyze for homework. And what he's going to say is we have to make the world safe for democracy. And he makes it clear that we have no selfish ends to serve, no desire for conquest, no dominion. We seek not material compensation for sacrifices that we shall freely make, right? And so we claim that Germany is the force of evil. These are the people we have to go against because of unrestricted submarine warfare, because of the Zimmermann note. But if you take a look at in reality of what is going on, I mean, England has a lot of, if you ask India if England is a force of democracy, they are going to say no, right? All of these different countries are engaged in imperialism. There's not really a clear side of what is the side of right. But Wilson is going to say we have to fight the Germans. And the thing is that he is going to decide to fight the Germans in a country that has a lot of German immigrants. So German was the #1 foreign language spoken in the United States around, right before the war. So there were German American newspapers, there were, a lot of German food, like we called hot dogs Frankfurters. And what starts to happen during the war is, Wilson gets really concerned that we have all of these German Americans while we are going to war with Germany. And we become sort of obsessed with hyphenated Americans, that everyone needs to just be an American. And there's a lot of things where people change the names of streets. One of the streets that was renamed in New Orleans is Pershing Street, was renamed into, anyway, I have to remember what the name of it was. Anyway, scratch that, I'll figure it out in a minute. I knew this before. Pershing Street used to be something German, I can't remember, but they named it after the general in World War I, and they took away the German name. People are going to stop printing German language newspapers. We are going to call Frankfurters hot dogs, hamburgers, right? Or, I don't know, freedom burgers, and I don't know, all these different things. So we are kind of like stripping away people's like German ancestry, and they are trying to assimilate into the American way of life. And there was a lot of push from the government to do this. One is what you're going to look at for homework is the Creel Committee, or what is also known as the Committee for Public Information. They actually create a propaganda machine to support the war. But the other thing is they are going to make it illegal under the Espionage Act to interfere with any military operations, including the draft. So anybody who spoke out against the war could be arrested. This is going to be upheld in Shank versus the United States. And the Sedition Act made it illegal to criticize the government. And this is going to be used against Eugene Debs, who criticizes the war effort, and he is going to be arrested. And he is actually going to start to, he's going to actually run for president while he's in jail. One of his most famous lines is, "I would rather 1,000 times be a free soul in jail than to be a sycophant coward in the streets." They put those boys in jail and some of the rest of us in jail, but they cannot put the socialist movement in jail. And so because he was critical of the government, because he was a socialist, he is put in jail for speaking out against the government, and they are jailing people for speaking out against the draft. So in Shank versus the United States, Shank was handing out anti-draft pamphlets, and when it goes to the Supreme Court, they say that you cannot falsely shout fire in a theater, meaning you cannot cause a panic. So what they basically say is that the United States has the right to jail people who are speaking out against the war. Women during the war are going to help in factories and nurses. This is going to help lead to the 19th Amendment. African Americans are going to fight in segregated units. And W.E.B. Du Bois is going to hope that if people fight in this war, they are going to be able to get rights as African Americans. Labor unions try to work with the government, and they sign agreements not to strike during the war. And, yeah. So the Great Migration is going to start to happen under World War I. Lots of folks are going to move from the South to the North, beginning with World War I, looking for jobs in especially places like Chicago. So tonight for homework, what you're going to do is look at propaganda. And this propaganda really uses, it's using emotional appeal to promote a action, right? And so Liberty bonds are the way that they funded the war. And, and you could take a look at the thing for tonight. The fighting in World War I was brutal. It is trench warfare, chemical warfare, mustard gas, and the peace is going to be signed in 1918. People are fighting in these brutal trenches. They would get trench foot. This is really gross, essentially because their feet are rotting because they're standing in water all day. And essentially you have a no man's land. You would have these big artillery pieces behind enemy lines who could hit only so far, and just beyond that would be the next trench. So you would have, artillery, which would essentially like fire the bombs, and then they would be able to land anywhere in here. Just beyond the reach of the artillery would be the other side. You would go over the top and then essentially try to make it to this side, right? There would be barbed wire you could get caught on. There would be machine guns. You could get bombed by artillery. Any numbers of ways you could get killed. And if you made it there, you would essentially try to stab these people and kill them. And then they would just retreat to this reserve, and then they would go back. And essentially, these lines do not move throughout the war, and it is brutal. So this trench warfare is what it looks like. People get shell shock. If you take a look at like this guy here, the 1,000-yard stare, people are exposed to, these explosions over and over and over. They are seeing the atrocities of war, and people are coming back. This war is not, war is often is seen as this heroic action, and people start to really question how heroic is this war when it seems like you're just basically running people through a meat grinder over and over and over again. We'll take a look at some of that in class. So yeah, these lines do not move very much throughout the war. And when the United States comes in, they help to push the tide of the war because everyone was so tired out. They call them the doughboys because they weren't like starving. And they are able to push it towards the side of the Allies. We have the beginnings of tank warfare, but it's not a major thing in World War I. You do have chemical warfare, which is kind of just a horrible atrocity, and it actually becomes illegal. And the beginnings of airplane, but most of the airplanes were used for reconnaissance and maybe to drop some bombs or chemical weapons, but they were not capable of what they would be in like World War II. So that is that. And there's the machine guns and the barbed wire. We'll take a look at the end of the war next time, but that is basically it.